Hello, welcome to The Bigger Picture, Goethe's Faust. Hope everybody's safe and healthy. I hope your loved ones are too. Let's get to it. Now, the story of Faust predates Goethe. There were many versions of a Faust folktale long before Goethe got his hands on the story and completely creatively reimagined it in a way that Christianizes science. Originally, the folktale versions of Faust were warning tales about why you shouldn't seek after scientific knowledge, higher learning, because it was like making a deal with the devil, right? So Faust was usually this sort of warning figure, somebody you weren't supposed to be like. Goethe's Faust, however, is not just a protagonist. He is in many ways a hero because he ends up in heaven at the very end, because although he makes a deal with the devil, right, the devil doesn't really win. Because Faust is constantly striving, which means he's never satisfied, which means that the devil never really lives up to his end of the bargain. Okay, so let's see. Let's dive in. I have Kaufman's translation here. I'll zoom in on a passage here. I'm going to talk about it in the live stream from today as well. But I want to zoom in on some of the language where I think Kaufman is preferable. In the live stream, I actually have an example where our translation is just as good, if not better, than the Kaufman, but Kaufman is generally recognized as the best in terms of a true poetic recreation, sort of imitating the same sort of style of language and rhythm of language as the original German. But in the introduction here, we have a beautiful quote from Goethe that I think speaks to a theme that we've seen. I think we see it in Morgenstern. I think we see it in Huch. It's this idea of a constant striving and struggling. So I think this is also a concept we see in Nietzsche. For Nietzsche, most commonly, will to power is manifest as overcoming resistance or overcoming a struggle. Okay, so here's Goethe in 1827. The Germans are really strange people. With their profound thoughts and ideas, which they seek everywhere and project into everything, they make life harder for themselves than they should. Oh, that at long last you had the courage for once to yield yourselves to your impressions, to let yourselves be delighted, let yourselves be moved, let yourselves be elevated, yes, to let yourselves be taught and inspired and encouraged for something great. Only do not always think that everything is vain if it is not some abstract thought or ideal. So he's talking about this sort of striving, constantly trying to elevate oneself to a higher level, to ascend, to creatively transform, which is exactly what Faust is talking about and what a lot of our poets are also talking about. I'm going to post, I have decided what I'm going to do at the Flex Day. So I have a short poem that will really speak to this as well. And then we'll also read some Martin Buber, which will speak to the theological, religious side of things. Okay. I also want to connect this idea to Kant. Kant gives us an idealist ethic. It is definitely an ideal, and even Kant recognizes that it's quite possible that there's no single person who actually satisfies this ideal of goodness. For Kant, the concept of God or a divine being really just represents our concept of something that is morally perfect and perfectly rational. Recall that for Kant, what is good is the good will, the highest good, the unconditional good, something that is good as an end and not as a means to an end. So the goodwill is expressed by good maxims which satisfy the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is the universal law that says that you should only follow rules that can be conceived of logically as a universal law. So what we have here is a morality that is defined by the very logical possibility of there being something perfectly good, right? The exact kind of abstract thought or ideal that Germans love to get wrapped up in, right? So for Kant, right, yeah, you might spend your whole life trying to be good, following Kantian ethics, but we are but mere mortals. So now I want to jump to part of the reading, and I want to highlight why I prefer the Kaufman translation in this particular case. And that is all I have it for this particular video. I'm going to try to keep it under 10 minutes easily. So this is from when Faust has just said in our reading, at the beginning of Faust's response, he says, "Now, once for all, pleasure is not the question." Okay, so it's at the beginning of that paragraph, and I'm looking at the end of that paragraph, sort of halfway down, and then the end. What in our translation reads as, "And all the good that to man's race is given, I will enjoy it to my being's center. Through life's whole range, upward and downward sweeping, their weal and woe upon my bosom heaping. Thus in my single self, their selves all comprehending, and with them in a common shipwreck ending." Right, so the themes here, of course, is that I'm going to participate in what all people participate in, suffering, right, experiences, struggles, and I will enjoy it to my being's center. So there is pleasure. I'm going to talk about that in the live stream, or I already have, depending upon when you're watching this. And then there's this reference to the self, right? This is something that's being enjoyed in the being's center. And then there's also this idea of, thus in my single self, their selves all comprehending, and with them a common shipwreck ending. So there's this idea of the single self here uniting with all of humanity's selves, and we all have this shared sort of catastrophic ending. Okay, which we have similar here. Also, our translation is trying to be poetic, so it's not a literal translation. I will talk about a literal translation after I read the Kaufman, and then I explain why I prefer the Kaufman here. Okay. "What is portioned out to all mankind, I shall enjoy deep in myself, contain within my spirit's summit and abyss, pile on my breast their agony and bliss. And thus let my own self grow into theirs unfettered, till as they are, at last I too am shattered." So we have the shattering, we have this destructive end, and we also have myself will grow into theirs. So what we have in our translation is, "Thus in my single self, their selves all comprehending." So I think this is sort of true to the Faust character, emphasizing this knowledge, but what we have in Kaufman is myself is growing into theirs. Okay, what we have in the German is actually quite different from either the Kaufman or our translation, but I'll explain why I prefer the Kaufman. Here's a literal translation of the original German, those last two lines of that paragraph. "And so my own self to herself," or to their selves, erweitern would be to advance or to reach. "And as them, their selves, at the end also I will be destroyed." Okay, so yes, I am mortal like all of humanity, right? But the idea here that's maintained in the original German and in Kaufman's translation is this idea that this is about self-growth and self-development. This is about that Nietzschean self-overcoming and creative transformation. Erweitern in the German, right? I'm going to erweitern my own self, right? I'm getting myself further, I'm getting myself higher. And we have that in the Kaufman, myself will grow. We don't have that there in our translation. We have this idea of I will be all comprehending, there will be knowledge, but we're not explicitly emphasizing the growth, the creative transformation, the self-overcoming, these Nietzschean themes. I'm going to leave it there. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.